What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got a reaction to Roy Orbison's Mystery Girl album, brought to us by friend, longtime supporter, patron of the channel, and Roy Orbison superfan, Evan David. Thank you, Evan David. Always appreciate you. I don't think we got any Roy Orbison up on the channel, and that's saying something because we got almost 1,500 videos up, so it's about to get remedied. If you've watched one of Evan David's requests before, you already know this. But if you haven't, Evan David puts a ton of research. These things are so informative. So he's going to give us all the facts, the quick facts, or not so quick, but he's going to give us a ton of facts on Roy's life, how this album came about. So before we get started, just to let you know, the music's not going to be in this video. It would get blocked. There's a Vimeo link below. You can check it out there if you want to go ahead and click there now if you want to watch the whole thing. That would be the best thing for you. If you just want to know what I think of all this stuff and learn a lot more about Roy, you are in the right place. Hang around. And Evan David says, rock and roll legend has it that Roy Orbison was born on the 23rd of April, 1936 in Vernon, Texas, in the midst of the mass poverty caused by the Great Depression combined with the Dust Bowl. Indeed, Roy would later recall how it was so dusty you could write your name on any surface in the house. It was Roy's father, an oil well driller / car mechanic, who later moved his family to Fort Worth in order to find work in the wartime aircraft industry, who first sparked his son's lifelong passion for music by giving him his first guitar at age 6, with Roy declaring that he was duly finished for anything else by the age of 7. This love of music and of Hispanic blues and country music in particular would thankfully stand Roy in good stead after his family moved once again to the allegedly one-horse town of Wink, Texas in 1946. Otherwise, his adolescence would doubtless have distinctively been miserable as someone who just didn't fit in with the typical all-American teenage environment so commonplace at the time. As Roy himself later put it, quote, "There are so many ways to be lonely in West Texas. It was macho guys working in the oil fields and grease and football and all about being a stud. I don't think that's much change nowadays. So I got out of there as quick as I could, and I resented having to be there. It was tough as could be, no illusions, no mysteries, no dreams in Wink. I had formed a high school band called the Wink Westerners, but we quickly changed the name to the cooler sounding Teen Kings. I didn't know what the stumbling blocks were or how likely you are to succeed at singing, but it didn't matter. I thought my voice was sort of a wonder. It was great, and it didn't hurt anybody, and it made me feel good. So I grabbed my group together and went on the road for 2 or 3 months. That was the beginning of my professional career. I made a demo of Ooby Dooby and sent it to Sam Phillips in Memphis, Tennessee. Ooby Dooby, a cover of a Dick Penner and Wade Moore written song, was duly released by Sam Phillips' Sun Records in 1956 and managed to break the Billboard Hot 100, although this proved to be something of a false start and chart success when it ultimately rose no higher than number 59. Nevertheless, this was the first major stepping stone in Roy's musical career, and he soon began to develop his songwriting skills as well as cultivate close friendships with such sun-aligned musical notables as Johnny Cash, who had recommended that Orbison contact Sam Phillips in the first place, and most famously of all, Elvis Presley himself, who years later would allegedly remark that Roy Orbison was the best singer in the world and the only one who could out-sing it. As for how his glorious singing voice had evolved in the first place, however, according to Roy himself, quote, "I never had any formal training. I think maybe it's just that I might be a baritone with a real high range, 2.5 octaves or so, but I never checked it. I started singing this way because I was writing songs and I wrote the melody that I heard in my head, and then I had to sing those notes as well. I didn't know how high or low you were supposed to go. I had to write the songs that I wanted to sing because no one else really would at the time. Then I thought since I wrote them that I might sing them better than the next person. The big sound of mine wasn't planned. It just evolved from the freedom I have because I never took music lessons, and I didn't know you should write a verse and then a verse and a chorus. I just took the melody where I felt it should go." Indeed, it was above all Roy's voice which would ensure that he once again stood out from the crowd of his musical peers, even as his own career continued to take shape, eventually leaving Sun Records and signing with Frank Foster's Nashville-based Monument Records in 1960, the year which would also see him release what would soon become his first major hit, namely Only the Lonely, co-written with his new songwriting partner Joe Melson. Only the Lonely would reach number 2 in the US as well as number 1 in the UK and would prove to be the definitive template for many more Orbison hits in a similar vein over the next 4 years, such as Running Scared, Crying, In Dreams, and It's Over, amidst a slew of others, all of which would seek to pack as much dramatic sentimentality and overwhelming angst as was possible into a brief span of 2 or 3 minutes tops, because that's how we did it back then. These masterful mini-operas would soon see Orbison be dubbed, quote, "the Caruso of rock and roll," to go alongside his other far more enduring nickname of the Big O, and even when, as in perhaps his most famous tune, "Oh Pretty Woman," the singer would ultimately get a tentatively happy ending of sorts, he would usually still have to go through the proverbial emotional ringer in order to get there. Orbison himself would later describe how each of my early hits is a piece of storytelling, but whether I was physically crying or just crying inside, it's the same thing. There I was talking about feelings when the whole age was macho. I've always gone against the grain. There's nothing wrong with going against the grain. All this would be coupled with Roy's deceptively simple yet utterly compelling performance style that saw him stand almost motionless on stage while singing his anthemic tunes in his typically all-black stage attire, including the notorious pair of dark sunglasses which he would wear on stage after losing his original thick glasses while on tour to ensure that almost uniquely amongst American solo artists at the time, he would be able to weather the initial storm of the British invasion and indeed would become even more enduringly popular in the UK than he was in his native land, as evidenced by the fact that once, when Orbison was first touring the UK with the Beatles, the latter would apparently go so far as to jokingly physically restrain him from going on stage for a staggering 14th encore while saying, "Yankee, go home." As eyewitness Tony King, then publicist for Roy's UK record label Decca, later put it, quote, "In spite of the fact that the Beatles were getting this huge acclaim from the British public, when Roy came on stage, he still had the goods to top them. He just stood there and sang. That's all he did. He didn't do anything else. I don't remember him putting one foot to the left or the right. That was the impact. That's what the impact was. It was that he had the nerve to do that, to just stand there and let his voice do the work." Even as Roy's musical career was seemingly going so well, however, a succession of disastrous events in his personal life during the mid to late 60s, including not only the loss of his beloved first wife Claudette in a motorcycle accident in 1966, but the death of his two eldest sons by her in a house fire a mere 2 years later, would not only serve to arrest his existing artistic momentum, but would also lead to much idle speculation that an inevitable sense of tragedy now seemed to be indelibly attached to Roy's life, which was indeed beginning to imitate the emotional bleakness of his art. The psychological impact of these seismic personal events, as well as his steadily declining sales of much of his new music, would see Roy apparently spend most of the 70s in something of a career limbo, although as Alex Orbison, Roy's second and youngest son by his second wife Barbara, whom Roy had met shortly before the fire, had swiftly married in turn in 1969, would later point out, "People always said, quote, 'Roy, you wrote these sad songs, you must be this sad guy.' And it would seem like the tragedies would happen and then you'd write crying or it's over. But truthfully, my dad wrote those songs when he was in a much better place and after the tragedies happened that put my dad at a disconnect with his songwriting craft. In the middle of the 70s, it puts Roy alone in the middle of a world that had changed so far from what he knew. Very happy that his present family is flourishing, but outside that everything had fallen apart. His new records didn't sell as well as his old records, but the guy literally had sold millions of greatest hits records and was still one of the highest paid entertainers. Indeed, even while his own recording career was still in doldrums, Roy continued to retain much of his popularity as a touring artist, especially in the UK, and as the 70s transitioned to the 80s, a wide array of artists, including Linda Ronstadt, Don McLean, and Van Halen began to have more and more commercial success with covers of his 60s hits, where Roy himself won a Grammy Award for his duet of That Loving You Feeling Again with Emmylou Harris in 1981. Perhaps the two most significant examples of the high esteem in which Roy was held by his musical peers during this period take place in 1987, however, the first of which occurred when Roy was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame by Bruce Springsteen, with the boss lavishly heartfelt praise for Roy's seminal influence upon his own musical career by recalling that, quote, "In 75, we went into the studio to make Born to Run. I wanted to make a record with words like Bob Dylan that sounded like Phil Spector, but most of all, I wanted to sing like Roy Orbison. Now everybody knows that nobody sings like Roy Orbison." Springsteen's speech clearly helped to boost Roy's returning professional self-confidence, which was bolstered still further in turn a few months later when an all-star group of artists, including Springsteen, Elvis Costello, Tom Waits, and K.D. Lang, who would herself duetted with Roy on a new version of Crying earlier in '87, which won a Grammy in its own right following his death, served as Roy's backing band for his legendary Black and White concert at the Coconut Grove in Los Angeles, which was also filmed and released in a video to great success. All this coupled with David Lynch's inspired use of Orbison's In Dreams for a key sequence in his groundbreaking cult movie Blue Velvet a year earlier in 1986 would see Roy's newfound cultural cachet steadily rise further and further during this time. As Roy himself put it, quote, "It was like everyone was starting up my career without me, and my life again climbed mountains. There was some fear involved because there was a legend in the background haunting me, and no way would I be able to live up to it. And then I realized it didn't matter. What mattered was jumping in with both feet and being committed. I have been taken aback by the way things are going. It's very nice to be wanted again, but I still can't quite believe it." Even as his long overdue return to artistic prominence began to gather momentum, meanwhile, Roy had already met with longtime Orbison fan Jeff Lynne at the former's New California home back in 1985. And it was this meeting which would sow the seeds of what would ultimately be Roy's 22nd and final studio album and the subject of this review, Mystery Girl. As Lynne later recalled at that point, quote, "I think he'd settle for maybe this is the end of it, that's my big time stuff. But I sort of nudged him a lot, to remind him how great he was. I wanted the good old-fashioned Roy Orbison again, the great Roy Orbison. So I managed to coax him into singing like he did when he did some of those great ones. You'd stand there by the mic and you'd say, 'Has he started yet?' And then he'd go, 'Okay, I think I've got it. Let's try.' And you'd start and you go, blam. All the needles would bend and it'd be like so loud. It'd be 100 times louder than when he was practicing it. Over the next few years, Roy would continue to work along with such luminaries as Lynne, Tom Petty, and members of U2, amongst many others, in order to craft the 10 songs which would ultimately feature on this album, while at the same time becoming heavily involved in perhaps the most beloved and successful supergroup project of all time in the shape of the Traveling Wilburys, which he formed with Lynne, Petty, George Harrison, and Bob Dylan. As Alex Orbison puts it, however, quote, "The Wilburys weren't the saving grace. My dad was at zero and they pulled him out of it. Everything in my dad's life was already working, and as a result of that, the Wilburys happened, and my dad's at top form." Unfortunately, while this return to top form during the mid-'80s may have been both personally and artistically gratifying for Roy, the added pressures of his Wilbury commitments on top of an increasingly busy touring and publicity schedule would ultimately only serve to put ever more stresses and strains upon a body which had already suffered the trauma of major open heart surgery back in 1978. The new album, dubbed Mystery Girl, had nevertheless been completed in November of '88, and by early December, Roy was looking forward to visiting his surviving son from his first marriage, Wesley Orbison, back in Texas, and listening to the finished album with him. Sadly, it was not to be, as Roy Orbison was to perish of a massive heart attack on December the 6th, 1988, at the far too young age of 52. Wesley himself describes the still jarring emotional impact of what happens as follows. "It's like the sad songs happen before the tragedies and the Renaissance happened before the end of the song, When he comes to the house for the visit, he's really excited about the new project and said, 'I've got a little time to hang out with you, man, just me and you, and I've got the new record. Things are going really great, for about an hour.' Then he's unresponsive in the bathroom. Getting to hear the record was a little less than happy news. It was kind of, this heavy, heavy bit of music that was new, but it was also kind of an end as well. This was all of the new music he was going to do. This was kind of maybe a gift, if you will. So I didn't get to listen to it with him. It took a couple of days for the dust to settle, and then I put it on, and man, it was just so wonderful to hear how good it was. I can't imagine how difficult that was to lose your father in your house and then have this new thing that you never heard and put it on a few days later. It had to be bittersweet, but I guess cool in a way that you could hear him like that. Evan David says the Mystery Girl album would be released posthumously on January the 31st, 1989 on Roy's new label, Virgin Record. It was Roy's first album of all new material to release since 1979, reaching number 5 in the US and 2 in the UK. Naturally, a considerable amount of this initial success could doubtless be attributed to the usual career bounce when an artist's untimely demise often provides. But, as Orbison biographer Alan Clayson pointed out back in 1989, fundamentally, Roy's singing was still as ageless and glorious as ever. Most of the material was affiliated to some aspect of the Orbison mythology, and the Mystery Girl songs are not in themselves devalued by the comparison. You Got It and The Lush, A Love So Beautiful are two that might have made the charts circa 1962. It's just that the 1960s hits will always have a head start of up to 30 years of availability and airplay. Evan David says, I myself first discovered Mystery Girl a few years after Roy's death, and I quickly fell in full-blown musical love with it, and I still treasure my original cassette copy to this day, while the album itself made a lofty number 4 in my own top 50 albums list for RTTC a while back. Hopefully this album will make just as big an impression on Sean and the rest of the RTTC community as it did on me, but even if it doesn't, I still look forward to seeing what you make of all of it in the comments below. Until then, I can best sum things up as to why this album, and indeed Roy Orbison himself, is so beloved by myself and other devotees by quoting from Mystery Girl's original liner notes as follows, quote, "First there was the voice, it transcended generations and sang of universal longings that touched the heart with truth and sadness and desire. It was a beautiful instrument that was played with something approaching perfection. It was a voice that never lied. The man was kind and good and gentle in a business and a world where such simple attributes are the exceptions. He sounded like a lost angel, but always wore dark glasses and dressed in black. He had more than his fair share of personal tragedies and suffered in his own way and only mentioned it between the lines. He never stopped working at his craft and leaves behind this album filled with shining examples of his artistry in full bloom." Roy Orbison sang about the great mystery, the only one that matters, the mystery of love where there is no solution, there's only hope. His songs take us into a room and we hear the thrill and threat of the mystery in the dark, where nothing is seen and everything is revealed. That's the end of the write-up. Great write-up from Evan David. We're about to jump into this album. Just a reminder, the music won't be in here. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. There's going to be some videos in here. I think there's 3. There were supposed to be 4, but one of the videos has already been blocked. But there'll be 3 videos in here too, so we can see Roy perform live. So let's jump into this. We start out with the only song I know on here, the lead track, You Got It. Evan David says this fantastic opening tune was written by Roy, Jeff Lynne, and Tom Petty and produced by Lynne and was later released as a posthumous single in January of '89, returning Orbison to the top 10 on both sides of the Atlantic for the first time in 25 years as a result. Chart success that was indeed well-deserved, and as the song itself is a joyous anthem of devotion whose sheer sense of fun is infectious, as you can hopefully see in the video that follows, which is itself taken from the song's only official live performance at the Diamond Awards Festival in Belgium. It shows Roy in perhaps surprisingly good form, given that he would sadly die a mere 17 days later. Wow. All right. Thanks as always, Evan David. Let's check this out. You Got It. See the live performance, cool. It's like crazy. This is 17 days before Roy passes, but you see there's no frills on stage, man. He's just singing there, singing it. The crowd loves it. His voice sounds fantastic. You get a really good idea of the power of that voice. A well-written song. I mean, basically just, anything you want. I love you. I'm your man, and you got it. I'll do anything for you. Just well-written song, obviously with Lynne and Petty in on it. It's a powerhouse of songwriting. But yeah, just a great way to start. Like I said, it's the only song I knew. Obviously, it was popular back then. I was a senior in high school. Now we're on to the next track. You see it below. In the Real World, written by Richard Kerr and Will Jennings and produced by Roy, Mike Campbell, and Barbara Orbison. This poignant return to one of the constant recurring themes of Roy's career, namely the stark contrast between dreams and reality, both succeeds in bringing the listener back down with a gentle bump after the relative optimism of the previous tune, and feature both Barbara and their eldest son, Roy Orbison Jr. on backing vocals, with the latter able to match some of the high notes that his father produced when other more famous collaborators couldn't do so. After all, as Roy's other son Alex once put it, my dad hung out in a place where your voice breaks, the place where every man wants to stay away from. It's where your voice cracks. That is where Roy Orbison lived. That was his stronghold. There, like the most sensitive, bare place, that's where he displayed his power, and he hung out in places that were embarrassing for people vocally. So the very fact that Roy Jr. was able to thus keep up with his dad's voice as well as he did still remains quite an impressive feat, Evan David says. In the Real World, a great demonstration of Roy's magical voice in that one. And, the song's lyrics are basically just telling you that it was great when we were in love and dreaming, but then we had to wake up, and even though we're always going to love each other, in the real world, there are things that we can't change, and endings come to us in ways that we can't rearrange. I love you and you love me, but sometimes we must let it be in the real world. And just that power in Roy's voice. The strings in the background were a nice little touch that popped in there, and just a really well done song that does demonstrate that quote that Evan David shared from Roy's son of just the power and the difference of where Roy's voice resides up there. Next up, you have in parentheses, All I Can Do Is Dream You, written by future Fleetwood Mac guitarist Billy Burnett and David Malloy. This is another return to the dream imagery so often associated with Orbison, but performed in a far more rocking, up-tempo manner, which belies what might otherwise have been a rather gloomy song. We were going to check out the live performance of the Black and White Night concert that Evan David was talking about in the intro, but it has been blocked, so we'll go with Spotify. All I Can Do Is Dream You. Shout out to Rick Vito on electric guitar there. Really well done guitar. And basically in the song, Roy's, I don't know if Roy's messed up himself, but he's let the girl get away. And, I've been away from you for so long. Still, every time I think of us, I get blue, but all I can do is dream you. He closes his eyes. He can imagine kind of every part of it. I don't know why I ever let us drift apart. But look who's sorry now, because every time I wake up and you're not around, it only brings me down, baby. All I can do is dream you. All I can do is dream you. There's nice backing vocals on there. Had almost a 50s, early 60s feel to it, so enjoyed that one. Now we go to A Love So Beautiful, written by Roy and Jeff Lynne and produced by Lynne. This is perhaps the best showcase for the sheer ethereal power of Roy's voice in the entire album, Evan David says, making it all the more remarkable that this astounding vocal performance was apparently captured in just one take in the back garden of George Harrison's mansion, Friar Park. Both Lynne and Barbara Orbison have described how Roy himself was brought to tears by just how powerful and poignant the finished tune was. And I, for one, Evan David says, can definitely understand why Roy reacted thus when I listened to this tune in turn, for it sounds every bit as beautiful to me as its subject matter could possibly be. And on this, George is playing the acoustic guitar. A Love So Beautiful. You had Jeff Lynne on keyboards and bass, and then acoustic was Jeff, George Harrison, and Roy. So what a superstar lineup. And drumming in there by Ray Cooper. So that ought to be a fun thing for Ray to be hanging out with those legends. But I can see why this brought Roy to tears. Just a fantastic performance, man. His voice is just haunting. And just the ambiance of it all. They did such a good job producing this one. You know, basically, he let her go. A love so beautiful in every way. A love so beautiful, we let it slip away. We were too young to understand to ever know that lovers drift apart, and that's the way love goes. So once again, that tragic story that's been the theme on Roy's songs through most of this album. Now we're going to finish out side one with California Blue, written by Orbison, Lynne, and Petty as a hymn to Roy's new Malibu home, and produced by Lynne once again. Petty has described how surreal an experience it was when they began writing this song about half an hour into his first meeting with Roy, while Jeff has commented that, quote, what I remember about the song was its simplicity. It's only got like 3-4 chords in it, and how Roy made it into a beautiful song with such a simple backdrop. California Blue, great performance by Roy, but also great production and instrumentation. You had the great Mike Campbell, lead guitarist for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. We had him on guitar and mandolin and on acoustic, along with Petty and Orbison on that acoustic. So the strings were in there, were conducted by Lewis Clark. I think those things really, really help lend an ambiance and a texture and a prettiness to this song, which, you know, it's just about as California Blue. One sunny day I'll get back again somehow, some way. Back, I don't know when. California Blue, living my life with you on my mind, thinking of things that I left far behind. It's been so long, doing all I can do to get back to you. California Blue. It just has that ambiance to it, that almost wanting and longing ambiance that fits so well and works so well with Roy's fantastic voice. Now we're going to move on to kick off side two with She's a Mystery to Me, written by Bono and The Edge from U2 and produced by Bono himself, who has described, and he also plays the electric guitar on this, by the way, who has described this tune's uncanny genesis as follows, quote, I'd had David Lynch's soundtrack to Blue Velvet on repeat, and it kept stopping on In Dreams. I couldn't sleep, and when I woke up the next day, I had a song in my head, which I presumed was another Roy Orbison song. I looked for it and couldn't find it, so I played the tune to the rest of my band. I said, it's like a Roy Orbison song, is it? They said, yeah. And then after the show, I was sitting with the guitar again, trying to finish the song. There was a knock at the door, and our security guard said, there's Roy Orbison and his wife Barbara outside. Can I bring them in? They'd really like to meet you. So the band looked at me like I'd either been winding them up or I had some voodoo in me. Roy said in his very quiet voice, really liked the show. Can't tell you why I liked it, but I really liked it. You wouldn't have a song for me, or shall we write a song together? I'm kind of into what you're doing. So everyone's falling around. No one could quite believe their ears. And I played him there and then this song, She's a Mystery to Me, which he loved. Evan David said, the result is a truly enchanting, captivating tune, one of my favorites on the album, and one which gave birth to the album title, which managed to reach the mid-20s of both the US and UK chart upon its release in February of '89, and which also featured prominently in the soundtrack of DC's Comics Aquaman movie many years later. I just thought that's an insane story, man. That's a crazy story. And we're going to react to the official video for this song, which Evan David says captures all the best qualities of a tune, which already, to quote Bono once again, boasts one of the finest vocals I've ever heard. I thought that's the other voice. It's almost not his, and it's like the voice of an angel, you know. He did have that in abundance. Any singer knows what I'm talking about, and it's just that moment when your voice is suddenly above you. And he seemed to have that on a regular basis, Bono said. Mystery Girl, little Ben Mont Tench on piano. He also arranged it. Jim Keltner on the drums. So you got some of the Heartbreakers popping in here, and of course Bono on guitar. I really like the song. I really like the song. I don't really care for the video. I mean, it was tough, right? Because Roy was already gone, so they had to try to come up with something. I just thought the video was kind of boring. But back then you had to have videos for everything. So, you know, I mean, it was fine, but it kind of distracted for me away from the quality of the song. But I'm sure many of you probably like the video. You know, Bono's writing, I enjoy it. I know some people don't, but I'm a U2 guy. Darkness falls and she will take me by the hand, take me to some twilight land where all but love is gray, where I can't find my way without her as my guide. Night falls, I'm cast beneath her spell. Daylight comes, our heaven turns to hell. Am I left to burn and burn eternally? She's a mystery to me. She's a mystery girl. So it just kind of evolves from there, right? She leaves him and tears him apart. She's a mystery girl. Now he's haunted by her side. It's the darkness in her eyes that so enslaves me. But if my love is blind, then I don't want to see. She's a mystery to me. So yeah, I really enjoyed that song. Really well done by everybody. Now we're up to The Comedians. Written by longtime Orbison fan Elvis Costello and produced by T-Bone Burnett, this twisted tale of ill-fated fairground-based romantic shenanigans was originally featured on Costello's 1984 album Goodbye Cruel World, with events later coming full circle as Costello himself was amongst those accompanying Roy's performance of the tune he had written during the Black and White Night concert, which is a version I'd like you to react to. So this one is available. The last one was Black, but obviously this one was from someone else. So this song has a lot of heat. I saw some critics said it didn't fit on this album, was the worst song on there. Other critics said it was the best song on here. So let's check it out. The Comedians. Really cool live performance to see. You had Costello on the acoustic. You had Springsteen on the electric. I know that at different times Jackson Browne was on the stage, and so was Tom Waits, J.D. Souther. I didn't see those guys. They might have been in there, and I just didn't see them. But great to see the power of Roy's voice just showing out, man, on this song. And the song is basically, I mean, I think it fits in with the album. I mean, I saw some critics said they didn't think it fit in with the album. I mean, basically, he sat there alone upon the Ferris wheel, and he kind of looks down, and his girl's leaving him with somebody else, and I'm up while the dawn is breaking, even though my heart is aching. I should be drinking a toast to absent friends instead of these comedians. I can hardly hear the music from the carousel. The wind picks up, the carriage starts to sway. As one by one the lights go out, it's closing time. I see you take his hand and walk away. Just, I mean, Roy's voice brings that power to it. So I thought that was a good offering. We only got 3 songs left. Next up's The Only One, written by Roy's eldest surviving son, Wesley Orbison and Craig Wiseman, produced by Roy and Mike Campbell, featuring Steve Cropper on guitar. Wesley has described how this evocative tune was initially inspired of all things by trying to make a personal song about isolation out of the frankly prosaic situation of having only one match left in your matchbook, and thus trying to make that one last match last. While one of Wesley's siblings, Roy Orbison Jr., has described the song as, quote, one of the sneaky ones that grows up on people who've listened to it a long time. It's one of their favorite songs on the album. And Evan David says, and I, for one, am increasingly inclined to agree. The Only One of the most instrumentally dense songs on here. The horns, arranged by Jim Horn and Steve Cropper, were fantastic. The organ and piano by Ben Montench is great on here. Howie Epstein on the bass and backing vocals. And, the song itself, like, it's the only guy who's lonely, right? He's the only one who's falling apart, the only one who's afraid of the dark, the only one in a crowded room, the only one who sees the blue moon. So I just thought all of those aspects between Roy's obviously powerful and great voice, and then everything else instrumentally really made it a rich song. Now we're up to Windsurfer, written by Roy and one of his longtime songwriting collaborators, Bill Dees, and produced by Roy and Mike Campbell. This tragic tale of a man who always goes for something, or rather someone, out of reach, and inevitably suffers as a result, was originally a full-on suicide song, explicitly depicting the death of the title character. But as another of Roy's sons, Roy Orbison Jr., put it, they took that into Jeff A. Cruff, and he says, I love it, I love it, I love it, but does the windsurfer have to die? Then Roy softened up to it and came up with the lyrics that are actually more Orbison-y in a way. Evan David says, a magical result is one of my favorite tunes on the album. Windsurfer, backing vocals by Lynn, Howie Epstein, and Roy. I think those really added to it. Some nice strings on here. Ben Mont is on the piano again. Mike Campbell on the acoustic. Rick Vito, nice little slide guitar on here. I still think at the end you can kind of tell that maybe it didn't end well for the Windsurfer, because the very last verse, it was early one morning on a lovely beach. He left a message and he wrote it in the sand. Why do we always go for something out of reach? Nobody ever really understands. And then Windsurfer, all he wanted to do was outrun the sun. Windsurfer, to take her in his dreams when the lonely day was done. So, I mean, I guess now that you know that Windsurfer didn't make it in the original version, I can kind of see it there. But nice little soaring tune. The instrumentation, once again, just like the last tune, really adds to the song. And now we're to the final track, Careless Heart. You see it below. If you have the cassette version, as Evan David does, then you have one more song, which is also on Spotify. You May Feel Me Crying, but it wasn't originally on the album, so we stop at this one, Careless Heart. Evan David says, written by Roy, Diane Warren, and Albert Hammond, and once again produced by Roy and Mike Campbell. This is an ode to lost love and lost opportunities. It's an apt return to Roy's traditionally tragic subject matter, and works well both as a closer for the album itself and as a highly moving reminder of the huge loss of artistic potential that took place when Roy died, but which nevertheless does not leave the listener in despair, and rather like the album as a whole, works instead as a thoroughly cathartic, if not healing experience instead, reminding one that, as Barbara Orbison put it, quote, at the very end when he was asked how he wanted to be remembered, he paused for a minute and he said, I just would like to be remembered. Careless Heart, good way to end this thing. We got Ben Mott on the piano again. You have Roy on acoustic, bass is Mike Campbell, drums, the great Jim Keltner, who played drums on every single song on this B-side, as well as on the second track. I mean, Keltner's probably the greatest session drummer ever, so he's been everywhere. Mike's on the electric and Mike's on the acoustic. So a great powerhouse musicians on this last one. And it is a good way to end it out, kind of as Evan David said, because it kind of goes with Roy's theme of his career, sort of, and he just let this girl get away, right? You were my angel, you were my heaven, but I was too blind to see. I let you slip away. I guess I never knew I had the world with you. I'd still be there in your arms, if not for my careless heart. I had my advantage. I took advantage. I took it too far, so now you're gone. I'm all alone. So that's kind of the theme of it, and just, that careless heart. So a really good way to end this album. And before I get to my favorite tracks, Evan David's personal top 3 tunes on this album in reverse order are Windsurfer, She's a Mystery to Me, and You Got It, with honorable mentions for California Blue, The Only One, and A Love So Beautiful. My honorable mentions are going to be California Blue and A Love So Beautiful. My faves are going to be You Got It. Now that might be biased because I knew that song, but it's a great song. And She's a Mystery to Me, the Bono penned song. So those are my favorites. So now we get to my overall score of this album. Look, I never listened to a Roy Orbison album, or really, I don't think I've ever listened to Roy Orbison through headphones that I know of. I mean, I know a couple, obviously, of his most famous songs, but not anyone I ever listened to. So I really did enjoy it. Really did enjoy his voice. I think this is an incredibly solid album. There's no duds on this album, and it's a very highly acclaimed album for a reason. I'm going to be at an 8.0 out of 10 on first listen. Just fantastic musicianship. Obviously, Roy's vocals are next level. So thank you, Evan David, for bringing this to us. Thank you, all the patrons who make this thing go. Check out our Patreon link below, or the Patreon link on the end screen, where I'll also put a video you may be interested in. Until next time, guys, I will see ya.